Forum Borealis Paradigm Expansion.
Greetings from the north, citizens of the world. Welcome to Forum Borealis. Folks, let me test your familiarity with our channel. What is the red thread throughout our shows? Spiritual stuff? False. High strangeness? Nope. Conspiration affairs? No. It's simply what Bella says. Paradigm expansion. This gives us a free pass to all sorts of areas. And it doesn't mean that it has to be outlandish, exceptional, or innovative focus. Sometimes basic education can be paradigm challenging enough, especially on subject matters which are myth-ridden. And that's the clue for today's program. We continue with the Norse series we've more or less stumbled into, and this show should really be the first of the series, since we go through fundamental matters concerning Vikings, Norse traditions and paganism, and yes, we're even touching the popular TV series. And obviously I had to dig up a genuine Viking for the role as my partner in crime for this conversation. A compatriot called Thor Elptirdalr. I suppose I should be kind enough to pronounce it in English. Thor Elptirdalr, who runs his own YouTube channel, focusing solely on what the show today deals with. Indeed, most of the topics we touch today are expanded upon by him in his videos. And as long-time listeners know, usually we go deep and zoom in on one particular topic, but today is more of a laid-back and light show where we browse through theme after theme, yet just as educating as you're used to. But before we start our raid, let me introduce Mr. Elptirdalr to you. His excellent YouTube channel is dedicated to exploring the evidence of magic, rituals and religion in the Norse world, sprinkled with general cultural and Viking stuff. Thor hails from Vestfold in Norway, but has grown up both here and USA. His formation in the Norse stuff started already as a kid, and he's read almost all the sagas. Mind you, there's hundreds of them, so that's quite a feat. He's currently learning Old Norse so that he can read them without translations. It's probably an advantage then that he has a bachelor degree in languages from the University of Agder. His research for the degree was Norse influence in the English language, which could be a single show in itself for those of us nerdy enough to find that interesting. His master degree was from Furtwangen University in Germany, in international relations and economy. He's worked in factory, in sales, as a DJ and producer, but his real passion is martial arts, which he's currently pursuing at a professional level. He's competed in mixed martial arts, boxing and jiu-jitsu, where he's won world championship for white belts and several regional championships for blue belts. He's training in the famous Black House Gym in Los Angeles, where he currently resides due to his martial arts passion, as well as options for music and online sales. He's lived in England, the Greek island Rhodes, and in Berlin, Germany, where he was influenced by the techno scene. Indeed, he's dabbling in music too, which can be found on YouTube and SoundCloud, and later this year also at Spotify. Thor Elptirdalr has recently also started an online shop called Norse Combat Sportswear, featuring designs of various Nordic symbols on the equipment and clothes. He's a member of some homestead groups and is formatting his own with the goal of acquiring a big farm for a small eco-village, being 100% independent and off the grid. The dream is to maintain a small community living like people did 1,000 years ago. Quite a noble aim, God's willing. Welcome to Forum Borealis, Thor.
Yep. Yeah, thank you for having me, Hal.
Yeah. So let me ask you first, is this the first time you've been interviewed?
Yeah, first ever podcast.
Cool.
I've been watching them for many years, but this is the first one I've been on.
Great. Which is kind of weird because you have a lot of work out there. How long have you been going yourself?
Oh, just a year. I made the channel a little bit more than a year ago.
Yeah, complete newbie.
Yeah.
I found you via your YouTube channel. Do you have also a podcast?
No. Some people have been asking me to start one. I might. Yeah, definitely. Lots of people doing really well on podcasts today. So that's thinking about that for sure.
It's the new Klondike. YouTube is completely broken and rigged and destroyed. So very hard to make it. But I will say you've done a fairly good job despite the obstacles. Now, I've invited you on today because two reasons, basically. Number one, as you probably noticed yourself, at least your YouTube channel is a testament to the fact that it's like a renaissance interest in these things now. Norse, Vikings, all that stuff. I didn't even know. I just discovered it accidentally when I had some shows about it. And I thought originally this is going to be so obscure. Mostly Norwegians will be interested in this, but I get much more, especially America, you probably discovered that yourself.
Yeah.
So that's number one, right? Number two is that I stumbled over your stuff. And usually when I see stuff like this, it is either embarrassing, like, oh, they get so much things wrong that it's just, oh my God. Yeah, they're either inept or it's like propaganda where they have an agenda, so they want to spin it to a particular kind of approach.
Yeah.
But it's so refreshing because your channel, I really recommend it to folks, is pretty, first off, you have a kind of a spiritual perspective. And you also have a very healthy attitude, very wise. Like I'm convinced your attitude on these things are similar to the ancients had. Oh. And I know something about this because I've been dabbling in paganism myself for centuries.
Okay.
So it's a very good information. You are well educated on this. And I guess my first question would be, well, it's a twofold question. Number one, how long have you been interested in Norse and Viking traditions and stuff like that? And how have you kind of educated yourself in it? That's number one. And number two, why did you set up a channel about it?
Yeah, the why I set up the channel is exactly like you said. Just on the internet is full of absolute garbage. People talking about Viking history and Norse history, and especially Norse spirituality, and they're just really making up lies, most of them. So that's why I started the channel, just to kind of put some truth out there. But for education, since I could read, pretty much been reading sagas, all these books, myths, pretty much everything. So it's been an interest since I was a baby, pretty much since I could learn to read. So I just found the knowledge that I had. I am definitely not one of the most knowledgeable people in the world, but when you compare me to all the lies that are out there on YouTube and the internet, I know a lot more than them, at least. So that's
it's a low bar indeed.
Yeah, exactly.
But did you just say that you've been consuming this kind of stuff since you were a baby?
Yep, since I, of course, mother telling the stories before I could read, and then as soon as I could read, reading them myself.
Nice. So your parents had an interest already.
Yeah.
So that's the way it should be, get it with mother's milk, so to speak.
I think that's how it is for most people. Most Scandinavians, at least, their parents will tell them at least one bedtime story, right? About the Norse gods and myths.
Oh, I think you're overestimating our...
maybe
our brothers and sisters, because I've been saying for a long time that Norway is probably the most disconnected of them all. I blame oil, by the way. Iceland, completely different matter. Like I told you in a mail, in Iceland they actually have living traditions still. Yeah, you can say it's somewhat polluted by either by Christianity, but good thing their Christianity was always a conspiracy to preserve the mystery. So if you know how to maneuver through that layer, you can get to the purer stuff. That's number one. Number two.
Exactly.
Right. And number two, much is degenerated so that much meaning is lost. But the good thing is that when it comes to symbolism, if you just have the key to the symbols, you can unlock them, even if it's been millennia since anyone got there. So that's a good thing. Plus, and like you say in many of your videos, you can deduct a lot of truths by studying other survival sources, because they all had like a common theme. They all only had different developments, cultures, language, symbolism, approaches, but you can kind of fill some holes in one tradition by studying another and a third.
Exactly.
Do you agree with that?
Exactly. Yeah, it's that's what I'm most interested in right now. There's not so much more that I can read about the Norse sources, but there's these holes everywhere, and you don't know where some of these answers come from. But if you look to some other foreign spiritualities that are very related, you can fill in the blanks on both sides, so they can all work together, and you see that they weren't that different originally.
Right, agreed. Now, let's start on the most superficial level, and we can dig ourselves deeper and see how deep we go.
Yeah.
And most of these things we're going to discuss, folks, you will find on Thor's channel. The channel's called
Norse Magic and Beliefs.
That's it. So that's exactly what you get. Norse magic and beliefs. You get a lot of good videos on it. Some are long, very short, which is suitable for most people today. Some, fortunately, go a little more in depth. But let's start, like I said, at the most superficial level. I think it's a truism that the movie Vikings has contributed a little. Not just that, of course, but it's kind of a symbol of this new Renaissance interest. So I want to start with that, actually.
Okay.
And it's not important if people hasn't seen that, because it's trying to portray historical characters. Because it's kind of obscure, like Kattegat. Where the hell is that? We know that's the sea between Norway and Sweden. So they kind of, I think they kind of saved themselves. Instead of saying explicitly these guys are Norwegians or these guys are Danish, they kind of did a both and thing. But where would you say that the main characters in Vikings actually are from, as far as we know?
Yeah, it's difficult. Anybody who has been to Norway, they see the fjords in the TV show and they say, oh, okay, that is not Denmark. That's not Sweden. That is Norway.
Exactly.
As soon as you look at the fjords. But most of the history they take from the Icelandic sagas and Danish sagas. They don't really, they're not really clear. And then he comes in contact with some other kings that were very real, King Hordic and Jarl, what's that Norwegian guy's name in the TV show, the Norwegian actor. But yeah, he was a Swedish king, so they kind of. Oh
yeah, that guy. I know who you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, the guy with the beard. I forget his name now in the show, but
so they put a Norwegian to play a Swede.
Yeah, exactly.
Typical, because they have very few Scandinavians in that show.
Yeah.
They have some. Mostly Danes and Swedes.
Yeah.
And who's playing Floki? That's a Swedish actor, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Swedish. That's Skarsgård, one of those brothers.
Right. Famous from the father.
Yeah.
But let's start with Ragnar.
Yeah.
Ragnar Lothbrok.
Yeah.
What do we know about him?
Yeah, so the sources are all scattered, and I just released a video about this earlier in the week too. Everybody, of course, wants to claim Ragnar as their own, and it's very right, because the sources say different things. Some of them say he's Norwegian with a Danish father, a Swedish mother, some Swedish born in Sweden but Danish father. So yeah, we're not quite sure. We're not even sure if he really existed or if he was perhaps many different people. That was probably more likely. That's what the historians agree upon. But at least most of the evidence points to him being Danish, at least Danish lineage.
What about his so-called brother, Rollo?
Rollo came 100 or more years later. Like, he was a real, a real.
And also, by the way, this is important to know, because we covered the invasion of the Normanners into the Danelaw area of England.
Yeah.
And that's the descendants of Rollo or those Vikings. But where was he from?
They think Norway. They think Norway. Again, not sure. They would call all of these people Norse in old times, but they're pretty sure it's Norway. As Hrolf was his name, Gangerolf. He was said to be so big that he had to walk. That was where he got his nickname from, because a horse couldn't carry him.
Right. Gangerolf, right.
Yeah.
And of course, there is another guy there called I think he was played by a Norseman, Harald Hårfagre, what is this in English?
Yeah. Yeah, so he was absolutely Norwegian, but I think the actor is German, actually.
Sorry, Harald Hairfair.
Yep.
Harald Hairfair.
Harald Fair, yep. The actor is, I think, German, right? But Harald Fairhair is absolutely Norwegian. We know that he was the first king that kind of unified the country.
Right, and I also think half of the Norwegian citizens can track their genetic lineage back to him.
Yeah.
Which tells you how active he was.
I think he had 27, 28 kids, or something like that.
Right. Yeah, he was like our version of Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
I think he's the one who has spread most genes on Earth. But for our case, it's him. So, what about Lagatha? Is she even historic?
Yeah, she was in one saga. I forget which one now. It might be Gesta Danorum, a Danish chronicle. So yeah, again, that's we're not quite sure. She was probably real, but she was just in one kind of inaccurate account, so we're not sure about her.
I see. So and then we of course have to go through the sons, because they are tied into very important events. That I will give the movie or the TV series the kudos that they've been good in finding excuses to tie in important historical events, although they violate the timeline many places. They have to, right? Yep. But they tied it in. So let's start with the sons. Say the names and then where they were from and when they lived, as far as you know.
Yeah, that's all difficult too. That's different sources say different things. Again, most of them point to them being of a Danish origin, but the sources say different things. We know Björn went to Sweden and he became a king there. His burial mound is still there, so we know he was a Swedish king for sure. Evad went to England with the big army, but then he kind of lost, and the rumor was that he pops up in some Irish chronicles a bit later on in time, and he became a king there and was eventually killed.
Oh wow!
I think Sigurd went east. Sigurd Snake in the Eye went east. What are the
east others? Means Turkey, Russia.
Yeah, towards the east of Europe, maybe Ukraine, down the Volga River, things like that. I'm not quite sure what happened to him. Was there any more? Ubba?
Yeah, and then there's the guy who they portray going to the west, to America.
Yeah, that was Ubba then. Yeah, so he definitely didn't go to America. Nothing in the sources about that, but others did. But his name nowhere comes up in any of those sources.
But is it true that, according to the myth, that Ragnar wanted to go west?
I'm not sure.
Because I remember he was portrayed as, in the beginning, I mean, they portrayed it as if people didn't even know England existed.
Yeah.
That's outrageous. Like, we're completely primitive, isolated, haven't heard about anything. Like, there's no history before Ragnar. That's crazy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, of course they knew they have found evidence of this in archaeology, that they had been trading with the British Isles for hundreds of years before that. So they knew where England was, and they knew where they were going.
Indeed, and they have there's a lot of ties. We're going to get to that now. In the few shows we've had so far, we've had one show covering Templars in America that shows that they are following an older Viking tradition. In fact, this was directly inherited to them because many of these Templars were Norwegians and Swedes. And this happened after the Black Plague, which is incredible. That Norwegian and Swedish Templars went to America. So we've had that, and we've also seen how Vikings prior to them, like, they was very active. Some went there for fishing, actually. We've also seen how Norway was actually, no, we haven't had that show yet, but I've announced it. We're going to have a show. I don't know if you're familiar with a book called The Viking Serpent.
No.
In Norwegian, it's called the Norske Pentagram. And I know the author. He has some explosive discoveries. For example, much indications that we were actually christened by Celtic Church, not the Catholic Church, which is an important difference. Yeah. Because although the Celtic Church belonged to the Catholic fold until they got crushed. They were very independent, and they had sources that were independent, which were pagan and went back to Egypt and the Middle East. And it would have been much easier for Norse tradition people to convert to this kind of Christianity than the Catholic, because the Catholic stuff was completely reversed, whereas this kind of Christianity took heed for stuff like ley lines, sacred geometry, acknowledging the runes, and a lot of stuff. But that's another discussion. We've had a show about that. We had a show about Hyperborea.
Yeah.
And what else? The Norse roots of masonry. And in all these shows, we've touched mysteries or phenomenons that are actually so interesting that we could talk about them themselves. And you have in many of your videos. So, for example, you have a video called Berserker Substances. I want you to explain, because I've heard a lot of rumors. Like, for example, this may be like a meme or a myth, but one is that they were feeding fluesopp. What's that in English? Do you know?
I think that Amanita muscaria is the word for it.
Yeah. That's a professional term.
The Latin word for it.
Yeah.
Special type of mushroom, hallucinogenic mushroom.
Yeah, it's a red one with white dots on it. So I've been told they were feeding that to the front line so that they went crazy when they attacked. Now, I don't know if this is true, but what have you to say about this?
Yeah, so that was a theory that they started with the mushrooms. That came up until the 1800s. That's when it first came out. First, we have no sources. Nothing tells us much about the Berserker state. We don't know how they got to that state. We don't even know much about them. There's only a small handful of mentions of them in the old sagas. But the mushroom theory that started in about the 1800s, because that's kind of just growing wild and in Scandinavia, and they thought it might be. But just in recent years, maybe the past 50, 60 years, they've done some experiments and they found that you're not very likely to go in a fight if you're taking those mushrooms. You get just sad and lethargic and sleepy and horrible stomach aches and things like that. So what I spoke about in the video and what they've theorized, it's kind of the main theory now, is they use henbane. Henbane seeds, and this makes you feel like energetic and light on your feet and kind of crazy for a little bit. So we're again not sure, but we think that it could have been henbane. And also we have found henbane seeds in some archaeological graves, Viking graves from the time. So that's a pretty good chance it's that, but again we can't be for sure.
No, I totally agree. We know that, by the way, that henbane, at least it's been speculated that henbane has also been used for spiritual purposes.
Yeah.
Of course, the Berserkers were warriors. So, in fact, maybe they don't even know who they were. What are the Berserkers?
Yeah, so in most of the sagas, they were kind of painted in a negative light. They were nuisances to the village. They would come in and challenge people to holmgang and take their wives and their land, and they were really a nuisance. This was in the Viking Age, but in some of the older sources, we have berserkers being more honorable warriors that were serving the king, things like that. So there was definitely, I think, a very, very old tradition that could go all the way back to the Indo-European roots. There were some warriors called Koryos that we find parallels of all over Europe, warriors that would go out, live in the woods and kind of be away from society and hunt and go on these spiritual type journeys. We don't know much, but the berserkers seem very similar. But then as we got to the Viking Age, the sources at least say that most of them became just a nuisance to society and they were just bothersome to people.
Yeah, this is a very important point you raise. In my show with, you should totally get this book, the show called Norse Roots of Freemasonry. Yeah. This author says the same about these people. It goes back to the Bronze Age, the warrior culture there. He goes even further. He claims that they brought he said that the original Norse people who settled here after the Ice Age retracted were peaceful and fastboende. What's that in English?
Living full time somewhere.
Yeah,
like year round.
Yeah, and doing agriculture and stuff. And they were worshipping Frey and Freya, male and female version of that god. And then came the more, should we say, patriarchal warrior cultures from the East with their Thor and Odin stuff. He even says that Thor and Odin was two different cults that amalgamated with this. And like, of course, we must give kudos to Thor Heyerdahl, or a country fellow who passed away, who worked with the similar theories before he died, but he puts it in a more recent time, Thor Heyerdahl does. But Arvid Ystad, he's now working on a new book about this thing, and a lot of other stuff that I can't talk about, and he's going to try to get a PhD based on that book, but nevertheless the book is coming out, also in English, folks. Lots of folks were complaining that his Norse Roots to Freemasonry book was not in English, but yeah, you can get that in English soon too. So that's that. But and so I would say the Berserkers then are really what people imagine when they hear about Vikings. That's really the Berserkers. Won't you agree?
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much. It was, think of the most violent, misbehaved people you can think of, and those were the Berserkers. The Vikings and the pre-Scandinavian, pre-Christian Scandinavians, they were very peaceful, very, logical, very diplomatic. But then you have the Berserkers that come in and just don't care about any of that. So they're probably where people's main perception comes from.
Yeah, and another thing they found out too is that Vikings were actually fashion snobs. They were dressing in fantastic garments. This is new research. Not this ragtag bunch of trolls, but they, both men and females, were wearing exclusive fabrics, very intricate patterns, etc. New research that they were caring of how they look. So when they are portrayed like these photo models in the series Vikings, it's actually not that wrong. But because we have to go very soon to where we started, like who came from where, and you have a super good video on that. But I want to complete the substance discussion, the toxication discussion first, because we mentioned henbane, we mentioned fly fungus or whatever it's called. There's two other things we need to mention. Number one is what we call fleinsopp. I think in English is just magic mushrooms. What do we know about that?
Yeah, same thing. It's just theories. It's definitely possible. I haven't tried these things, or else I could maybe give a better viewpoint, but it doesn't seem like if people are taking magic mushrooms, they would be likely to fight in a war. Also because...
No, I'm thinking more that has been used in a spiritual practice.
Oh, spirituality, yeah, I think so, absolutely. Just, I'm sure... even though we don't have the sources for these things, of course, as we go further back in time, closer to nature, people have a better knowledge of the mushrooms and the plants around them and exactly what they do, not less. So I think, yes, they absolutely would have used them, not so much sources. And again, it would have been probably a very small percent of the population, the Verdva, like the witches and the spiritual leaders and things like that. It wouldn't have been everybody, definitely not something they did on the regular basis, but for some spiritual discoveries and magic, for sure, I would agree that they used those things.
In our Vikings in America series, I mention, I think it's me who mentions it actually, not the guest, but no, the guest mentioned, in the Norse Roots show we had, there he mentions that they found cannabis seeds among Vikings, but it's even more extreme than that. It's not just that they have had access to recreational use of cannabis. We know they've used hemp, but that's not even that. It's actually the classical cliche thing, it's smoking, but even more extreme than that. You know Leifsbudir. Leifsbudir is this waypoint station that they set up in Newfoundland.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Or was it Nova Scotia?
Yeah, Newfoundland.
No, I think it's Newfoundland. And that was supposed to be like a traffic point for ships going to Vinland, further south, northeast USA, and the settlers in Greenland and Iceland. Now, they found that, and this is pretty recent too, the people who hanged in Leifsbudir in Newfoundland were also using recreational cannabis.
Oh.
And that makes me think that, you know what, they must have, the cannabis usage in Scandinavia must have been a trade with the natives, Indians. Because where else would they get this from? I suppose they could get it from India, but don't you think that it's more likely they got it from the West when we know there were ships going to the West?
It's a good question. We have found, I think it was either cannabis seeds or maybe hemp seeds that was in the Oseberg ship in near Tønsberg, basically the two most famous and honorable witches that got the biggest burial we have in Norway. I think they found it in there too. And then, I didn't know that they found the seeds also in that little settlement in Iceland. I've been meaning to go check that. No, not in Iceland, sorry, Newfoundland.
Yep.
I've been meaning to check that out, but I don't know. I don't know about where these kinds of things grow wild, if it came from Africa or if it came from, even if they traded with India, like you said, maybe, or if it was the Americas, it absolutely could be possible.
Because there are indications of long-term trade with both Inuits and Amerindians. Yeah. And so, okay, that's technically possible that they could have brought it with them from Scandinavia. I mean, if I was supposed to live in that godforsaken island of Newfoundland, I would for sure pack some cannabis seeds.
yeah.
But it all depends on how widespread it was at home. It could have been the other way around. They got it and then they spread it at home. Yeah. So that's interesting. And do we know of other substances used in Norse tradition, Norse spirituality?
No, none of the sources give us say anything about it. Of course, they were written, most of them, many hundreds of years after, and these substances would have probably been very, very frowned upon by the Christians who came in there, and we're trying to get rid of these pagan traditions and spiritual rites and things like that. But we do know that there was some sort of sacred ritual that they have. There was probably many, but there was one. This is what a lot of our myths are about too, where there's this maiden, either a giantess or a goddess, offering mead to the hero or things like that. So definitely there was something in that, and there was probably some sort of very sacred ritual. There's a good paper on that by Norwegian Maria Kvilhaug. I would recommend that for sure. She basically speaks all about this.
So mead is mjöd, sant?
Yeah.
What about mugwort? You have a video on it.
Yeah. So that also has been used for thousands of years. In the Viking Age, don't know if we have any sources going over that. It was kind of written from, in Christian like missionaries and things like that. They would write down this, and we have some examples of the use of mugwort there. But of course, if we look at the Scandinavian folk tradition and these magic things there, mugwort popped up a lot. And of course, mugwort can be traced back to ancient Greece. So that was definitely used for a long time everywhere.
Yeah, and we know that other similar pagan traditions back in that day, or actually not back in that day because we were one of the last survivors, but earlier pagans in Europe did indeed use a whole range of substances, including the mysterious soma. Some even speculate that they had access to DMT. Yeah. Not through ayahuasca, but through... what was it? Some fungus thing, like the Pythian oracle in Delphi.
Yeah.
They are speculating that she was inhaling fumes from coming up from the cracks in the stone floor in the caves.
Yeah.
So that's, and I also know work on near-death experience and out-of-body experience, like scientific research into that. And they say that most of the ancient spirituality has been informed by encounters with death, like near-death experience, like ecstatic experiences with or without substances. deep meditation, initiation rituals, a lot of practices concerned about deaths, and that still lives on, by the way.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on then. Now I want to go back a little to a more light topic. One of my favorite videos of yours, but I haven't heard everyone yet, so it may change. But I really liked it because as soon as we start talking about Vikings, what happens? Everybody want to claim them for themselves, especially Swedes, Danes, and Norwegians. The Icelanders are more silent, maybe because they know they're actually the only one who got the tradition still.
yeah, that's true.
But give us a crash course now, because people are confused, of course. Even the Scandinavian people are confused. Who came from where? How could we say that there is a difference between the Vikings in these countries? I mean, you may as well throw in the Finns and the Western Island people too, because it's all conflated into a Nordic culture.
Yeah.
But there are differences here, but feel free to go into details about this.
Yeah, sure. My video I did on that, I spoke for 20 minutes, I think, but I could really speak for 20 days.
Yeah,
it's such a big subject, all of the differences. But yeah, it's basically in the video said that the Danes, they're always, of course, more connected to continental Europe, and they were the last kind of Christian, the ones who were always on the front of the Christianity trying to come in there. So they kind of had to settle, and they went to all these different places, and they went out in large armies to do whatever they need to do. Norway, they were...
Hang on, let me add something.
Yep.
My impression of the Danes is that, yes, like you say, they were the bulwark against Christianity, so they were exposed to that. But they also became Christian because of that, right, before us. But also they were not raiders.
Yeah, not so much.
As much as they were invaders, right?
Yeah. I'm sure they raided, of course, but they were more invading in large parties. They were interested in actually going to places and settling there and setting up a new home for the Danes, whereas the Norwegians, they just take your stuff and go back home or settle in Iceland or something like that.
Yeah, we were the bandits. But wasn't the Danes also more into trade?
Yeah, more trade, of course. It was a bit difficult too, because a lot of these Christian places would not trade with pagans at the time, so there was a struggle there as well. But the Danes, more interested in trade, and that's probably also why they became Christian earlier than anyone else, because they depended on that trade.
And probably also why they had to invade, because if these goddamn suckers don't want to trade with us, we just have to take over the place.
Yeah.
And what were their problem? Why did they expand?
Yes, I'm sure lots of different reasons. It could be definitely population growth was a factor, and definitely freedom was a factor too. They were finally starting to, for thousands of years in Scandinavia, they would live in small tribes, just not more than 50 or a couple hundred people. But now it was kind of all of Scandinavia was being united under kingdoms. So the whole country and some kings came in and they were doing some not so good things. So people, I'm sure, wanted to move away and settle for freedom. That was also a big motivation, I'm sure.
Right. But it's a good point about the population, because Denmark is a very small place physically.
Yeah.
And they don't even have hills to hide. I mean, mountains to hide behind. I mean, it should be probably the easiest area in Scandinavia for one king to seize. Did they get one king before the others?
Yeah. It's, I forget the first king in Denmark. I forget his name, but yeah, it was much before. I think the first king in Norway was Harald Fairhair, as we spoke about earlier. That was the late 800s, but even then, after him, it was kind of split up again and no king for a while. But Denmark, was pretty much unified under one kingdom since the early Viking age, probably even before.
So what do we know? I love the way you take on the Swedes. What do we know about the Swedes during this time?
Yeah, so the Swedes were going east. In my video, I was speaking about just making fun of the Swedes, how they were doing nothing and sitting down and just poking some fun at them. But the Swedes did absolutely a lot. they went to the east, settled there, set up the Rus Vikings, and then basically set up huge populations there, not only in the Viking Age, but also in the migration period hundreds of years before. And of course, the Bulgarian Guard, they made it all the way down to Constantinople, that area. So the Swedes definitely did.
Miklagard, we call it. But
yeah.
I have to add, we also know that Norwegian Vikings went to Miklagard.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just Swedes, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, as far as activities in the West, it's just that we have not much written about what the Swedes did back then. So it's of course there's not much chronicles, and there wasn't much writing going on in the East as there was in the West, in Francia and England. So there's lots more records of what the Norwegians and the Danes did than the Swedes.
Yeah. You kind of you call them, you poke fun. You call them a big brother.
Yeah.
Well, but you give them one kudos that's very important to mention, which kind of legitimizes their entire slacking throughout the Viking Age.
Yeah.
Because you say they were best on preserving our traditions and our spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's super important.
Yep. And they were the ones that remained pagan the longest. They were quite some time. It's officially about 80 years, I think, after Norway and Denmark became Christian, but I think unofficially the traditions lasted much longer in Sweden, and they were just a lot more remote, and they definitely did a better job at preserving some of these spiritual practices, all of these a lot of the examples of magic and pagan practices that we find all the way up until the 1600s, some of them. It's coming more from Sweden than anywhere else. So they definitely did a much better job at preserving the original traditions.
But it must have been easier for them because if you go very north, you have Lapps, Samis, who are into shamanism, and we have the Finns who... I guess they were also shamans back then.
Yeah. They were always known, at least from the Norse sagas, they were known as being very good at magic. That was the Finns and also the Sami. So them even more than the Swedes. Their native traditions and beliefs lasted much longer than even the Swedes. That was even a couple hundred years after Scandinavia became Christian. So
wow.
Lapland and Finland, absolutely, they did an even better job than the Swedes at preserving these old traditions. But of course, they were from a different language and religious family, but still very much similar.
But it's interesting with Finland because they are of the so-called Finnish Ugric family that one thinks is a Western version of the Turanic. But be that as it may, when did they become Christian? Because the Christianity they have Orthodox Christianity, which tells me they were invaded from the East.
Yeah. That came a bit later on in time. I think. Okay. I'm not sure exactly, but it was, of course, the Swedes who eventually Christianized Finland. I think that was shortly after the Viking Age. It might have been the 12 or 1300s. So that the Christianity in Finland would have been very similar to what was practiced in Scandinavia at the time. But then, of course, they had all these dealings with Russia later on in history. That's probably why they became Orthodox.
Okay, interesting. So then, if that's the Danes and the Swedes, what about the Norwegians?
Yeah, of course. They're the younger brother. They're the one that's always getting into trouble, as I mentioned in that video. They were raiding a lot more, but still a very peaceful people, actually. They, if anyone reads the sagas, they will see how diplomatic and peaceful they would be. Of course, they would raid, but it was always for a good reason, and the violence was always kind of for a good reason. It was the raiding, of course, is not justified. That's not nice. But if there was a conflict in between different tribes or different chieftains, it was always very, very justified. So it wasn't just blind violence like people believe.
No, but like you say yourself in the video, Norwegians even raided other Vikings.
Yeah, they did.
Such a nuisance.
They would raid their next door neighbors, the next village over.
So in the beginning of the series Vikings, it could be a closer depiction of how Norway was functioning, because in the beginning it's all these tribes who clashes.
Yeah.
But we too had our problems, but not similar, I would say, to the Danes, because the Danes were overcrowded. That was not the problem in Norway, of course.
Yeah. And it's a question of food too. It's even the same today, isn't it? That most of the food in Scandinavia is produced in Denmark, so there's much more agriculture there. So even though the population in Norway would have been much smaller, they would have not had as much food to feed as many people as Denmark would, for example.
That's a good point. So they had to find new. That's partly also explains why they were raiding, but also why they were explorers, because lots of these Western explorations came from Norway. Do we know when we settled the West Sea islands, like I'm referring now to, of course, Orkneys, Shetland, Faroe Islands, and Iceland, and Greenland for that matter?
Yep. I forget the exact years. It's in the books that I have, and they have they have pretty confident dates on all of those. But yeah, the Shetlands, Orkneys, Faroe Islands for a very early Viking age, early 800s. We have records of chieftains and tribes being set up there. Iceland probably around the year 900. I forget the exact year. I think it is written down, but right around 900. Greenland shortly after, and then when they settled in the U.S. Or the Americas, Newfoundland, like we spoke about, that was right around the year 1000.
And we know also from the sagas that there was activity before that. If you listen to, I have a post rant in part 3 of my show called Templars in America. I go through not the entire, but I go through many evidences of Vikings going west prior to 1350, which, for some weird reason they think that 1315, then everything stopped. But there's indications to show that it didn't, but that's another story. Yeah, so now we have a clearer. But what would you say about the Icelanders, by the way? Because we should, if they were settled, we could say they are the small brother of Norwegians. But it's not just Norwegians who settle in Iceland. There's also Celts who settle there. We know that from genetics too, that Icelanders, who's been very isolated, so they're a wonderful genetic research experiment. We know that they have a lot of Celtic and Norwegian. Like the same is true, of course, for Scotland and parts of Ireland too. But what would you say about the Icelanders?
I think you probably read a little bit more about it than me, but that's what I've seen as well. That they've traced the male chromosome for DNA in Iceland, and it's mostly Norwegian they found, but for the female DNA there, it's mostly from Ireland. So that they probably sounds like most of the women, they were brought by the Norwegians from Ireland, and they married, and that's what they did there. So that's at least what the DNA evidence says.
Sounds like spoils of raids.
Sounds like it.
But we know also that Irish monks settled in Iceland very early. So they've always been exposed. We even know that native Indian, we know that from they even know when she came.
Yeah.
So there was this Icelandic Viking who brought a wife from North America.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I said that the Swedes were better at conserving our traditions, but the same can be said for Icelanders too, won't you say?
Yeah, for sure. They were the ones that if it wasn't for Iceland, we would have almost no recollection of the religion of the Scandinavians, the native religion, that all of the texts, Prose Edda and Poetic Edda, they were written in Iceland. Of course, a couple hundred years later by Christians, but they still they had a conscious effort to preserve that, and they were allowed to, of course, because other places in Scandinavia would not have been allowed to write down these texts. If it wasn't for Iceland, we would have no recollection of the myths. If it wasn't for Sweden, we would have no recollection of the traditions and customs. That's the way I like to put it.
So maybe it wasn't too bad to put a Swedish actor in as Floki.
Yeah. The spiritual one. Yeah. It's a perfect fit.
Yeah, and he had some knowledge about, he was a very good making ships, I think.
Yeah.
And okay, so now cringe pagans. That's a serious you got.
Yeah.
No, let's move to the spirituality then. How would you describe Norse paganism? What was the practices? What was the core of that system?
Yeah, that's another question could go on forever about.
I know. Do your best.
The biggest mistake I see a lot of people making is treating it like it was its own thing. But it was really not very different from all these other polytheistic beliefs from all around the world. We were all the same family, every single people in the Indo-European culture. So that can go all the way from India all the way up into the north of Scandinavia, all throughout Europe. So we all, going back 8,000 years or so, we had the same language and the same religion, and we just spread out and evolved apart, but the same core spiritualities are there. So I would suggest people, European, different native religions are great to look to, and of course the Norse is going to be very much like that, but also Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma, as they would call it. Of course, it's separated by 8,000 years of evolution, but still a lot of the same core principles are still there, and I think people forget about that. They want to just come into Norse spirituality and treat it like just mythology or Christianity or monotheism, but it's really we can focus on more of the other polytheistic cultures around the world, and we can get a much better idea of how it was like that.
So there are many different terminologies used. We have Seder. I mean, not even know how to say it in English. Galder.
Yeah.
We have Blot. I don't know if that's what they say in English too.
Yeah.
You even have a video here about reincarnation in the Norse belief system. Would you say there was a reincarnation there? Concept?
Yes, absolutely. We have quite a few sources for that. And again, all of the Indo-European religions believed in reincarnation at some point. It's just that when they stopped believing in this is the question.
So, for example, you have one video called The Different Types of Norse Magic. Could you list them and explain them to us?
Yeah, let's see. That was a video a long time ago. I'll pull that up.
Det står på thumbnail.
Yeah.
Det er Galdre, Seider, Rune Magic, Divination, Necromancy, Shapeshifting, Sigils, Herbal, Animalism.
Yep. Great.
So whenever you're ready.
Yeah, just pulling it up quickly.
Blood magic, all good.
Yeah. Okay. So, would you like me to speak about what each of these are?
Yeah, because many people listening know a few things about spirituality, magic, esotericism. So many people will get it, but of course, always try to make it as easy, comprehensible as possible. Yeah,
for more of the beginners. And that's the reason I made that video, The Different Types of Norse Magic, is just to show, because so many people these days also are interested in magic and Wicca, witchcraft, and things like that. And they look to voodoo, they look to the English tradition, they look east and all these things. But the reason I made this video is because the Norse, I think, had a more rich culture of magic than anywhere else, in my opinion at least. And they had just so many different ways to do this. And we actually have sources for much of them to see what it was actually like.
Right. So what are they called and what do they pertain?
Yeah, so the ones that will come up first that most people have heard of, they're probably the most well-known, is Galder and Seider. Galder is very easy. It's just a chant, or they might call it mantra in the East. just some sort of poem that would be believed to bring some sort of magical effect. Saidr, very mysterious. We don't know about it. This would be the closest thing that we have to shamanism, where a witch or even a wizard would get up on a platform, do some kind of crazy dance. We don't know exactly what it is or how they got to this trance-like state, but then they would give their prophecies or even curses or all kinds of things like that. Then, of course, rune magic. This is what has been kind of misinterpreted, or where there's a lot of false information about there today. People have kind of recreated these things, and we really don't have a lot of sources from ancient times to...
Hang on, is most of the pollution from contemporary times now that this has a renaissance, or is it from the Nazi time where they also...
Yeah, I would say it started then. It probably started in the early 1900s when all different types of people, different countries in Northern Europe, they would be looking into the runes and trying to figure them out, because we actually know very, very little about them. And it's just people coming with their own, interpretations and theories, which is totally cool. We need to recreate some things because there's just not much sources about it, but we need to be clear about what is a modern invention and theory and what we actually know from ancient times. And runes is a perfect example of that. People are doing all kinds of crazy things with runes, but most of it has no basis in the old sources that we know of, at least.
Interesting. So there's not much we can say about rune magic, for sure.
There was definitely done. People using runes for divination today, I see a lot of that. Rune readings, we have no evidence that was done. It's possible that it was, and much before the Viking period, but at least no evidence that it was done. But as far as rune magic, carving runes for some certain magical purposes, yes, that was absolutely done. But we only have... I think we have less than 10 actual examples in archaeological finds and old texts that tell us exactly which runes to carve and what the effect that it was believed to bring is. So people have reconstructed things from that, and that's pretty good, but just people need to know that we don't know a whole lot of what they actually did from the old sources.
But we can infer a few things, because what's a traditional tale account of how we got the runes?
Of how we got the runes?
Yeah, I believe it's Norse Sturluson who says that, about how Odin...
Oh, yeah. So the myth, when Odin was hanging in the tree for 9 days, and he just cries and then looks up, and he discovers the runes that way. There's a lot of theories to that myth and lots of interpretations as to what that really means.
Yeah, and that Odin saw that the other tribes had magical alphabets, like the hieroglyphs and the Hebrew system, and wanted one for himself.
Yeah. Says, oh, okay.
For their own. And, if it's true that they were hanging in around the Black Sea, they would be more likely to be exposed to other magical alphabets. And if they were exposed to stuff like the Hebrew system or the hieroglyphs, then we can infer one thing, and that is that whatever the connection, it doesn't have to be like that, but we see an early comparison between runes and those systems. And then we can look at, okay, so what did they do with the magical alphabets back in that time? Then we can infer from that most likely the same applications were then done with the runes. Is my thinking.
Yeah.
You catch my drift?
You know much more about that, I think, than I do. The magical alphabets from more south in Europe.
Yeah.
So is it kind of the same thing? Do they have these symbols and letters that they would carve on things for?
Yeah. So it would be like multi-purpose. Like symbol was it was a sound, it was a geometrical thing. It was, you could count. It was a letter. It was a word, or even a name. It also had a magical property, so it would be multifunction, and it was, of course, like a letter, like an alphabet thing.
Right.
So, and that's the thing in esotericism and spirituality and paganism, that there's always multi-layered functions. It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
And I think we have to approach the runes in the same vein. We see interesting stuff like, for example, as was uncovered in one of my shows, the Templars in America, that in 1350, and even later than that, so we're talking after the Black Plague, when most of the people who were competent and could read and write were wiped out in Norway, we see that Cistercians, which are kind of a more mystical aspect within Catholicism. Cistercians, we even know, were connected to the Knights Templars, for example.
Ah.
So we know that Norwegian and Swedish Cistercians were using runes. And we also have runes all over Götland, is that what they call it, where lots of Templar round churches and Cistercians hang. So we know that at this time, we see that educated people, albeit educated in a new tradition, namely an heretic Christian tradition, probably also connected to the Celtic Christianity as another dude has uncovered. We see that those people who we know are spiritual and also live here and so close in time to the Norse religion that they have to be influenced by it, are applying runes within their own now new spiritual system. So something has survived there. Of course, we don't know how much where they identify as Christian, how much was that a new and different thing, or how much was it just a mixed religion, because we see in Scotland that there was a mixed religion going on also up to the 1300s. We know this from many sources, but one of the new discoveries that I'm going to release a show on that very soon, but it's called the Journals of Henry Sinclair. We see that the Earl or Jarl of Orkney, namely Sinclair, if these journals are authentic, was witnessing in the 1300s up to the 1400s ceremonies both in Scotland and in Norway where they were honoring both Celtic and Norse gods this late. And this is called a mixed religion. We know the same happened when the Vikings settled in the British Isles. For a long time there was a parallel. This is how they think Freemasonry origined. Is the newest. So this is all very interesting, because then the runes have been recognized as a magical tool, as a practical tool, and even so effective that we don't have to limit it to the old religion. We can even use them in the new religion.
Yeah.
So this I find very interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know all that. There was so the actual runes, and of course I'm sure they developed a little bit with time. We know that, but the runes and other symbols very similar start to pop up in the places you mentioned.
Yeah, and Sigurd Agrell, he argues for the 25th rune, which is discussed. And we also have, of course, phenomena like Uthark rather than Futhark.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot. But you list as number 4, you list divination.
Yeah.
Then you mean both with and without runes, right?
Yeah. So without runes, we're not sure that runes were used for divination. They used other things, sacrificial chips that they would throw and give some divination. But there were so many different types of divination. It could be fire gazing. It could be sitting out on a rooftop. It could be utiseta, sitting out on a burial mound. Of course, seidr is a type of divination, and all these types of things. Divination can be so many different things in the Viking Age. We have lots of sources for that.
I think in Viking series, at some point, someone was reading the intestines of an animal or a human. I'm not sure. Was that something was practiced here?
They might have. I think that they used to do the placenta. I'm not sure if they did that in the show, but we're pretty sure that they could do something with the placenta after the birth and tell about the health of the child and apparently what some of the sources suggest is they could even tell its destiny from there, which is we don't know, but they can, at least we know for sure that you can tell the health and longevity of a child that was born by looking at the placenta. So that's all very interesting. I don't know if they did that in the show though.
Okay, what about necromancy?
Yeah, so that.
What is that, and how did they practice it here, do you think?
Yeah, so that is Utiseta. It would be that. There's quite a few sources for that in the sagas and the Eddas, where they would go sit out on a burial mound, and that would in a way wake up the spirit of the person that was living in there. They could also break into the burial mound. We have lots and lots of sources for that. Most of the burial mounds we have found have been actually broken into, and some of the sagas explain that the spirit of the person wakes up then, and it's kind of a transfer of power when that happens, or initiation into the family in certain ways. So that's definitely, it's not like they woke people up and a zombie came walking out of the ground. It's just kind of waking up and speaking to the spirit of a dead person.
But burial mound, you say?
Yeah.
Because we have these, we call it gravhaug.
Yeah,
but did these become a part of the mount over time, or were they done like that from the outset?
Oh.
I mean, did they make some kind of burial monument, like a house, and then it just became, overgrown and a part of like a mount?
Yeah.
Like a pyramid? Or was it always that they just were digging in the earth?
Yeah, exactly. So it's and we see these all over Europe. It's not just in Scandinavia, burial mounds. It's basically stones piled together in a mound. It's of course a lot of work. So only the most wealthy and high status and honorable people would receive these burials. But in very ancient times, the Bronze Age and before, there would be lots of these burial mounds, and they would even call this in some of the sagas, they would call this the burial age, and then there would be a cremation age sometime around the migration period up until the Vendel period. This was the cremation age, where most of the burials would happen via cremation. And then again, in the Viking age, we start to see these mounds come up again, made of stone. And then, of course, you know as well as I do, they're everywhere in Norway. They're ancient burial places, and they're just on random farms a lot of the time, and they've just been overgrown with grass and things like that. But the interesting thing is most of these have been broken into after the fact, and this was a tradition by the pre-Christian Scandinavians, some sort of ritual. We're not exactly sure why, but it was definitely something that was done.
So they, even back in the day, they broke into the tombs.
Yeah, and it was not grave robbery. It was done by family members or trusted people. We don't know why they did it. There's lots of theories, but almost most of the burial mounds we see have been broken into actually for some sort of spiritual purpose. It's
so interesting. If you haven't yet, you should listen to the show called Norse Roots of Freemasonry, because especially I think in part 2 he goes into practices in masonry which is very resonating of the stuff you're talking about here. I can see how these things, we know of course that masons are, they have this grave thing, the Jolly Roger, the pirate flag.
Oh yeah,
the head and the crossbones. Yeah, that's actually comes from the Templars, which again got it from the Masons, and most likely the Masons got this tomb obsession that they have from the Norse. So if someone is interested in masonry, for example, when they read Arvid Ystad's book, they will understand what it's about. If they're interested in Norse but don't know about Mason, the same there. So you can come from 2 different directions and bam, get an understanding. That's what I love about that book.
Yeah.
And I'm not as competent as you in the basics. I'm more familiar with the more weird outliers.
Yeah.
So I would love someone like you who knows the basics to, your take on these interesting theories. Folks, keep an eye on this space, because I'm going to have many more shows onwards. I'm going to interview an Icelander about unknown stuff, especially about the travels west. I'm going to interview the chap who wrote the Viking Serpent. So many more interesting theories are coming about this. So consider the show today as like a basic education, as a context for these more specialized shows.
Yeah.
All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.
Okay, so necromancy, magic with the dead. What about shape-shifting?
Yeah, so that's also a very difficult one. Very hard to believe that they did things like that. We have some stories in the sagas of people turning into bears to fight in a war, or people turning into a bird to fly, or people changing into a whale to swim to Iceland to see what was going on there.
Not into wolves?
Yeah, I'm sure wolves too. I'm sure wolves too. Yeah, of course, wolves and bears. Ulfhedner and Berserker, they were same thing. It's just what type of skin you would put on yourself. So
hang on, the Berserkers were actually worshipping bears, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting because that's one of the oldest cults, the Neanderthals, who were not primitive monkey men as people think. They were just, they were Homo sapiens because we all have Neanderthal genes. They could breed without sterile offspring. But it's going to take probably 50 years before we have a normal attitude to the Neanderthals. But the Neanderthals, they were into both burying their dead and also worshipping bears. And they were using flutes too. And they even put in the graves of the dead people stuff. It's kind of similar actually as the Vikings. They put stuff for the other world.
Yeah. It's really interesting how old these traditions could be. I mean, it could be hundreds of thousands of years maybe. We don't know.
Yeah, related, right?
Yeah.
But it's also interesting with shapeshifting is that we don't have to believe in werewolves and stuff like that because I think it was Game of Thrones who actually featured this shamanistic fact, because of course, the guy who wrote Game of Thrones is super informed about history and myth, so it's all in the open that he's borrowing, like Tolkien did, borrowing from traditions. Oh. But what he does with the North, the people beyond the wall.
Oh yeah.
Remember, they could go into a trance and then they could fuse the consciousness with a bird, for example.
Yeah.
That's the kind of shape-shifting I think they were doing, because that's a shamanic practice where you, through meditation and stuff like that, can go into, try to fuse with another, with a lower being, like a bird.
Yeah.
Most likely, I think that's the shape-shifting.
Yeah, and and this is a normal thing, like you said, in the East, the shamanic practice is, and Eastern traditions, they believe in this as well. Just most people did not know that the Norse also did something like this. But yeah, we have sources for this, changing into whales, like I said, bears, birds, all these kinds of things.
What about sigils?
Yeah, so that's definitely from later on in time. That's more of the Icelandic tradition. They're similar to a lot of the Christian like sigils, and what do they call them, like Solomonic sigils, things like that were used in mainland Europe. So there's definitely lots of influence on that, and a lot of these magic books or Galdera books that we find in Iceland, and there's lots of those, but they're from a bit later on in time, quite a few hundred years after the Viking Age. But some of them, not many, but some can definitely be traced. We have a pretty good chance that it can be traced back to Viking times, or at least be an evolution of something that originated in those times.
Yeah, I'm sort of a collector of rare, obscure stuff and writings, and I mentioned to you one so-called black book, or but that's mostly Finnish, Swedish or Finnish, and there's a lot of sigils featuring there, among just what we call kärringråd and basic superstition too. So what about herbalism?
Yeah, of course, herbal is that's a huge subject as well. Of course, they did that. This was don't know if we can really call that magic, but they definitely had herbs that they believed had some sort of power. And it's been proven today that a lot of these things are true. Some of these ancient herbal remedies actually work, and it's not just magic, it's science. So yeah, of course they use those, and we have lots of examples of that.
Yeah, actually I would call it magic, because magic is the belief that you can influence an outcome.
Yeah.
By doing certain stuff that connects to it, but the connection is not apparent. Now, I would say some herbs can have magical properties if, for example, they can open spiritual doors for people, but also if they can heal something that at least those people didn't know what the active ingredients was. I mean, now we can scientifically see cause and effect, right?
Yeah,
so it totally fits in the magical paradigm. And then you also have actually alchemical aspects where you apply, for example, a herb, a vegetable, whatever, and you make it more potent. You help speed up the natural process. I mean, we do it with food in a way. We manipulate the food so it's going to be easier for us to eat, but you can do the same with medicinal applications.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
And then I think the last one you are listing is ritual animism.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I don't even know what to call that. This we can find. Well, these are so old from all around the world, but we really find a lot of these in the Scandinavian folk tradition. It's taking kind of inanimate objects, like it could be taking a specific branch from a tree and doing something with it, or taking to take a raven's heart and bury it in a mound, and it would come out as a magical ring that would give you strength, and all these different types of things that use different objects in nature that you do something with it, some sort of combination, and then it would give some sort of magical effect of that. And I relate it to animism because it's of course very hard for most people to believe that you can take these inanimate things and they bring a magical effect. But if you think about animism and the fact that these inanimate objects can have some sort of spiritual energy attached to it, then that's definitely something that people could understand a bit more of how it works.
Yeah, that makes sense. We should be understanding also of the fact that neither the Vikings nor the Norse who preceded or followed them were isolated. So there's been influences left and right here.
Yeah.
Well, I already mentioned how the Viking culture wasn't like one thing. It was an amalgam of different immigration waves prior to that made the Norse paganism. But if we're gonna look for because there is two things here. One is the obvious thing that if you go far enough back, then, as you say in one of your videos too, that the Germanic tradition, the Norse tradition, and even I think the Celtic tradition is pretty similar. It's just one culture, one people.
Yep.
This is if you go really far back to when I think Europe is divided only by 3 cultures, I think.
Yeah.
But you also have the fact that we have found huge, like stuff that comes from far away.
Yeah.
We have evidence, like I mentioned stuff from the Americans. We have evidence from Islamic, Buddhist, even Chinese.
Yep.
So how international, say something about this. How much did we know about what was going on in the world, and how much did we interact with it?
Yeah, and that's difficult to say, of course, too. That's we know for sure they traded with the East. We have plenty of things found in archaeology that can be traced to all the way as far as India and China. The question is, did the Scandinavians make it all the way there? We know, confirmed that they made it to the Mediterranean and the first part of the Middle East, but did they get all the way to China and India and bring things back with them, or did they just kind of meet halfway in the Middle East and then trade that way? That's what basically the question is. But they definitely had contact with the East.
Even if they met halfway, they would have known about the sources. Like, okay, so there's something called China where this comes from, I see.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And it an artifact or a piece of jewelry or a pot or something that they traded with, and it was just there in the Middle East where they traded? Or did someone come from China and they were actually meeting those people there, and definitely they could have learned some spiritual things from them as well? So it's all interesting, but of course we don't know for sure.
Right, and this goes to the question of what tradition to follow, because today, I mean, we live in a modern world, and if you look at places like America and Australia, America, I mean, including Canada and all that,
yeah.
and I would say South Africa and many places where migration. So if people come from these countries and they're drawn to the Norse, right?
Sure.
There's the question of, and you have a video on this, so I'd like you to share your perspective on it, but should the Norse revival now that's going on, should that be reserved only for people who are Norwegians or Scandinavians? Or is it a free-for-all? What's your attitude here?
Yeah. So that's always a big question on a lot of these groups. They like to fight about these things, and of course, it's people who are on the far left or on the far right who are always the loudest. Those are the opinions we hear.
Yep.
But it's the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that's where most people can agree. Most people will feel a calling to their own ancestry and what their own ancestors believed. But like I said, you can learn from any type of spirituality, any type of native religion around the world, just because there are so many missing pieces. I look to Hinduism all the time. I look to Native American spirituality all the time, all these different places, just to fill in some of the holes. And of course, a lot of people have Scandinavian ancestry, even if they don't know it. And then really, this was a religion. The Norse religion is just what we call it, and what was practiced in Scandinavia at the time, but it was a religion for all the Germanic peoples, and they of course migrated throughout all of Europe. So everybody, we can say, at least if they have European ancestry, they have some ancestor somewhere very far back that practiced this Norse paganism, Norse spirituality. But of course, it's people can do what they want, and people will know where they feel the calling most to. But they should be open to all different spiritualities and learn from everything anywhere in the world. Yeah,
because these traditions, I believe, have a common root anyway.
Yeah,
and it's also very hard these days. I mean, if you live in America or Australia, as I said, because we can say, contact your traditional roots, but they have no, of course they have traditional, but that would be Aborigine or Amerindian, right?
Yeah.
So no wonder there's a lot of interest from those folks. But I'd say, look, if you don't have a local tradition that resonates with you, and like I've said before, it's always the best to use the local, because we are grown up and formatted and educated in symbolism, which is resonating with our culture and psychology. And although it is possible, for example, for me to give up my entire life and go to Tibet and become a monk there, it would be much easier if I was born and bred there.
Yeah.
It's going to be super hard, like a Tibetan coming to Norway and starting to study and practice the Norse. Actually, he's an advantage, because like us, we are disconnected with it, so we have to start from scratch, right? Whereas if it's a living tradition, it's going to be easier to just adopt that. But for those who can't, pick the one that resonates with you, even if it's not the one from the place where you live, or maybe even if you can't even legitimize it with your ancestors, because we know that Vikings took slaves. Now, the slaves weren't treated as awful as, for example, the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah, exactly.
But they did, and although, for example, if it was a Christian, I don't think they forced them into Norse, but they did accept them into Norse.
Yeah.
So if they did it,
I
think we should be as generous too.
yeah, absolutely.
And you make a point in one of your videos of these traditions actually not being that different. For example, you compare it with German stuff. You show how the gods have the just different languages for the same names.
Yeah. So it's all the Germanic. Anywhere where there's Germanic language or Germanic migration, they at one time had the same religion as the Norse. It's a Germanic religion. It's not a Norse religion. Just specifically, the Norse is just what lasted the longest before they were Christianized, and it's where we have all of our texts from in Old Norse, and of course Scandinavia is where the texts are from. But it was really a religion of all the Germanic people. So that's they migrated everywhere in Europe, especially in the migration period. So it's everybody can feel at home almost with this spirituality, or at least feel some calling to it.
So the Catholics basically crushed all the other versions, so that the only stuff left was up here.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm. But you also have a video where you say too much focus on the gods in modern Norse, and then you list entities that were important in our tradition. Can you say a few words about this?
Yeah. So that's what we have the most evidence of being practiced on the daily. The gods in the sources. And first of all, most people in Europe will know this. I made that video specifically for Americans because a lot of them are, trying to pray to their gods every day like they would in Christianity, and that's just not how it was practiced historically. The gods were focused on at very specific times of year, either for war or for an offering or for a high festival, things like that. They were not believed to be in contact with them every day like a lot of people in modern times are expecting. But these other spirits, the elves, trolls, things like that, they were much more in contact with them every day almost. And we have saga mentions of this, and also a lot of laws from Scandinavia a bit later on in time that were prohibiting pagan practices, and that basically tell that these other spiritual entities, land spirits also, and things like that, they were a much more central part of the daily practice. The gods were something that were called upon and tried to be used for very specific times in the year.
So this is important because in Iceland, for example, because Americans have like romantic notions. Oh, they go to a remote Norwegian fjord or mountain place, and I got in contact with an ancient Norse tradition. Yeah. Forget about it, okay? Yeah. We are raped thoroughly. It's raped out of us from the Christian tradition. But if you go to Iceland, actually we have some survivals in terms of these notions you mentioned, Vettir, trolls, you say, help with magic. Yeah. Alv is ancestral spirits.
Yeah.
Vettir is land spirits. But Icelanders, even today, there are Icelanders who have a much more living, because we have these notions. We have it. Yes, they survived Christianity, but they kind of lost their practical role for us. Trolls became these boogeymen. But if you go to Iceland, there are people still uninterrupted who do have a daily or like an everyday relation to these energies or entities or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. And it's been 1,000 years since we've had the real understanding of what these different entities were believed to be. But just the fact that people still know what they are, they still have the same names. Maybe the understanding has kind of changed and gone down over the past 1,000 years, but still it's in their culture.
Yeah. And I mean, look at this. Fylgja means follower, protective spirit. I think even in Christianity you have that notion. Your guardian angel or something like that.
Yeah. I think in Celtic paganism it's called the fetch. I think like that.
Right.
Something.
Yeah. So that's a super basic. Disir, I haven't even heard about that. Female spirits, but Dis, of course, is fog. So could be a relation there. Disir. Fog. Yeah. Of course, there are some that's not listed in. Maybe you do list them, but I can't see them here. And that's like Nøkken.
Yeah.
Huldra.
Yeah. So many, and then these all pop up in Scandinavian folk tales and starting in the 1600s, and people automatically assume, those things weren't an original Scandinavian belief from pagan times, and those are not Christian things that pop up there. Yeah. These are not Christian things. They must have some sort of pagan origin at least.
Yeah, where else would they come from?
Yeah.
Okay. What about the 9 worlds? I think that's interesting, because now we're talking about stuff that you can find in all spiritual tradition. They have this concept of the dimensions in existence, or death, all this stuff. Egyptian,
Yeah.
all sorts of traditions where we can draw upon similarities. But what is the Norse version here?
Yeah, so Nine Worlds, New Heimat, is what is referred to in the old texts. The nine worlds are not listed anywhere in the text. They're not listed as these are the nine worlds here. We just know that there were nine worlds, or the world isn't even the right way. It should be realms. That's the proper translation. So there have been, since the 1800s, 1900s, some different historians have come up with these nine worlds and theorized what they might be. But they don't know, of course. They're not listed in any of the Old Norse texts, but we just know that there were nine realms.
So do they name them or say anything about what they mean?
Not really. It's all symbolic, of course. We of course, comparing it to other religions around the world, of course, they all believed in different dimensions, and we do too. So I think in Celtic they believed in five, and it's different numbers of dimensions depending on which spirituality it is around the world. But the Norse, at least we know for sure, they believed in nine. What they are, we have no clue. There's lots of theories, and my video goes over some of what those are, but it's not something that we know for sure.
Okay, that's interesting. So, there's so much. We don't have time for everything. Let's take some quick ones. Yule. We say Yule still. Actually, that survived Christianization. Everywhere else they call it Christ Mass.
Yeah.
Mass for Christ. But we still call it Yule. Now, I've argued to people who... I'm annoyed when Norwegians write it Yod. That's Yule.
Yeah.
Because isn't that an Anglofication of the word Yule?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of, they think they're very pagan when they do this.
Yeah.
What they really are doing is the opposite. They're showing, oh look, I'm influenced by by English.
Yeah. And they call it this Yuletide, and what that come from is some of the Scandinavian settlers in the 1800s and 1900s. They would come to America, Minnesota area, and they would say Juletid. We know that, and Christmas time in Norwegian. But then, of course, the Americans changed that, and they just call it Yuletide. And it just it sounds horrible.
It makes sense. Totally Nisseman English, but yeah.
Yeah, and they just lost the understanding and what it means. It just means Christmas time, and Yuletide is right. I don't know, that's just a bad word for that.
That's funny. Is this connected to your video series? I haven't seen them, but I'm gonna, called Cringe Pagans.
yeah, that's I haven't made a...
Tell us a little about that.
I haven't made a video about that, but I will soon. That's it's just a series that I'm making. I only have a few episodes now. They're quick 30-second clips just making fun of all of these funny pagans that we see online that just are not getting things very historically accurate at all.
Yeah, I mean, look at Wicca. Wicca is created in the 50s by a guy who was partly he was into co-Freemasonry, Le Droit Humain, and partly he was into one of the magical orders, was it Golden Dawn? So it's a complete, it's nothing to do with traditional survival of a kind of a witchcraft tradition, but they want to force it into that, so they are deluding themselves.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's no survival of pagan traditions. I know for sure there is, but that's not it. But you have a video about something, I think I even mentioned it. It's probably accurate, and that's witches and broomsticks.
Yeah.
Could that derive from cider?
Yeah. So that's my theory. I haven't read that anywhere else, so that could be wrong. But looking at what side it was shameful. There was always a staff involved. There was a witch getting into this trance-like state and things like that, and giving her prophecies and magic. But this is very, very similar, I thought, to the stories of witches on broomsticks that we hear from much later on in time, until the 1600s. And we know for sure that witches would put this cream, especially in Scandinavia. We have quite a few stories about this and around the witch trials and thing. But again, it's all over Europe. They would put this cream or salve on their broomstick, and they'd rub it on areas of their body where it could be absorbed through the sweat glands, and that would give them the effects of whatever hallucinogenic or salve they would be in. So I just thought that had a very, very similar aspect to Seidr, and I think that that's also what Seidr probably evolved in, because staffs were actually made illegal. You were no longer allowed to own a staff because they thought it would be pagan magic. So they would have done this thing, but it would have been on a broomstick. So it could have been, that's just my theory, it could be some evolution of that.
Yeah, but you know what? Other people have thought the same as you,
Yeah, okay.
which is good news, because that just confirms.
Yeah.
They put this bulmeurt, among other things, on these sticks, and they became horny from it.
Yeah.
So I can totally see how a Christian monk or a priest could, Satanism, devil worship, some old tradition that survived.
Yep.
But another interesting thing is blot. What would you say blot is? You were not listing that in the 9 different types of magic.
Yeah. So blot is just the offering. It was the main, basically the main practice of paganism that was outlawed when Christianity came. And blot is just at very specific times of year, giving an offering. It would usually be an animal sacrifice, and it's not exactly what people think it is. It's not doing some kind of evil, the satanic worship type ritual like that. It was just simply a slaughter of the animals and an offering to the spirits or the gods. Leave some of the animal part left for the birds or predatory animals, whatever, and then of course having a feast.
So they ate the animal, right?
They ate the animal. They didn't just they slaughtered it and they ate it. It was always right. They didn't just slaughter the animal and leave it there to be taken over by nature. They left the inedible parts out and they ate the animal. This was a feast. This was a party. This was a happy time that the whole country, children, men, women, all participated in. It was a normal part of life. 3, maybe 4 times a year.
So they basically did the same as the Amerindians. They were actually better than the Christian, because a Christian would just kill the animal and be done with it and eat it. Whereas we try to put it into a kind of a sacred context, right? Like, I thank for this gift or whatever.
Yeah. And we see this tradition, I think, all the way up until the 1800s in Scandinavia. People were, it was very, very illegal still. So they were not able to do the whole huge festival as it was done in pre-Christian times. But they would leave out offerings on tree stumps and out to nature and things like that. And there was actually laws forbidding it all the way up until the 1700s, I think. So people were still doing it at this time.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you look at, for example, Yule, Christmas tradition, we have what survived there. I don't know if that was outlawed, but putting out food to the wood creatures or the farm, the ancestor spirits or whatever.
Yeah.
To Nissene. Yeah. We call it Nisse.
Yeah.
That's kind of similar, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm sure it's... I'm sure that's a very, very old tradition. Not these kinds of things are not Christian. They come from a much, much older time than that.
Absolutely. I've been in pagan celebrations of the seasons. They were very important in the old religions to mark, because the old religions were cyclical based, whereas the Abrahamic religions are like a linear thing. They believe in something starting and then getting better and better and better, and then a collapse or something, like a doomsday. And this is the same you see in our culture all over. We see it in transhumanism, in scientism, not science but scientism, the religious worshipping of science-y images. Like, for example, this belief that we were super stupid, and now we're just getting better and better and better and better. Yeah. So this is a linear understanding which is completely different from anything that has preceded us in the world, all over the world.
Yeah.
And so it would be interesting to know a little about how we worship these seasons. Do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, it's
I know you have videos on it.
Yeah, there's there were certain rituals, of course, and certain practices all over throughout the different seasons. I don't think we have a lot of it in writing. But of course, we know all pagan cultures had some sort of seasonal worship and traditions and some sort of festival or celebration of the seasons coming and ending, and hoping that, of course, in the Norse, this was a very important practice, hoping and doing some certain rituals that the summer would come back to life, because if it was winter all the time, then we would be in very big trouble.
Yeah. So do we know how they did it?
No, we have some records of, the festivals and the practices they did, especially at Halloween time, which was their new year, actually. It would have been called Vetternatter, and that was their new year, basically marking the end of the year, the death of the summer and the light. This is sometimes interpreted to be the death of Balder, the Norse god. And then the winter comes, and to avoid the Ragnarök that would be coming, we do these certain rituals and plant seeds, of course, and hopefully the summer comes back so we can bring life and food to everything again. That is just but there's lots of theories on that, and interpretations that Balder's funeral and all of that is filled with rituals that we humans actually used to do at that time. But that's all theories, and it could take an hour to go over those.
Right. No, I get that. But what about blood magic? You do mention it, and I know that's a disputed point. What could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we know that they would use blood. At least I know of two records of that. Of course, for the blods, the sacrifices, they would redden the hyrge, the altar, with blood. So that would always be done. And also different mentions of rune magic that we read about in the sagas. They would carve the runes and then redden those with blood. Not exactly sure why that was done, but that doesn't say anything in the sources. But we know that it was done, that blood was believed to aid some of these things, and it had some sort of specific energy or power associated with it.
That's interesting. So a couple of more points before we have to close shop for today.
Yep.
The gods. You have one video here. Question if they could have been real people coming from Turkey or the area around the Black Sea.
Yep.
What's your attitude to that?
Yeah, so that could be for many, many different reasons. Yeah, we definitely have records. There are many records in all of these chronicles and sagas all over the north of Europe that the gods came in from different places, and the gods were actually real people living at different times. Some sources say they were from Thracia, which is right above modern-day Turkey. Some sources say they were maybe from north of the Black Sea, so maybe Ukraine area or Caucasus Mountains, and they immigrated here thousands of years ago. But then there are, of course, more recent stories of the gods living around the migration period. So we're not quite sure what all this means. Were they real people? Don't know. It could be just kind of the Christian authors trying to make the gods into real people. So the people living at the time would just realize that their ancestors were the gods, and they were not to be worshipped as pagan gods like that. And there's also the fact that these could have probably been real people, but simply named after the gods that they were already worshiping. Like calling a kid Thor or Odin, like we still do in Scandinavia today. This could also be very possible. There are different reasons, and we can't be for sure.
That's interesting. But what about this Eastern influence of chakras and also the lotus position? I see you mentioned a couple of things about that. I mean, that's not that weird, given that the original Indian traditions are related to ours. But
Yep.
Do you think this is a common origin, or do you think it could be a later influence?
Yeah, exactly. That's always the question when looking at these similarities. Is it influenced? Was it someone in Scandinavia who traveled to India and learned these things and brought it back, or was it just
Or
two?
visitors from India.
Yeah, yeah, or visitors from there as well, or was it that, or was it just two separate cultures that evolved very differently, but after 8,000 years, they, they turned into very, very much similar things, and they made the same spiritual discoveries. I believe that's more likely that we started out as one same religion long ago, and we just made these same sort of spiritual discoveries and discovered these truths that and we call them different things, of course, but yeah, I think that's more likely that we just develop these things by ourselves.
Yeah, I suppose we could say that's Occam's razor, but another possibility is not either or, but both and. Mm-hmm. That there is a common source, then we encounter a more modern version of that. We recognize, oh my God, you guys are speaking of much the same as we do. Especially in the pre-Christian times, that should not be a big deal, because then they were used to probably more pagan stuff going on in further down in Europe than up here. We were probably just peasants in their eyes, right?
Yeah.
So when we kind of meet others, it may not even have happened here, it may have happened elsewhere in Europe, then I could see how that could be taken back home because who would be prone to travel? It would be people who had resources and cultivation and education, who would then also be more, not just a random peasant, right, but someone who would, and they may have traveled for spiritual purposes. I wouldn't be surprised if these were Swedes, for example.
Yeah, probably.
Who did go far east, who were concerned about the traditions, and who didn't probably meet people like that. So I can easily see that scenario too, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay, what about, and this is a big thing, because people know today that females have had a prominent position. They do it today, of course, but maybe also back in the time. So first off, did we have female warriors? In Vikings, females are for the most represented as under men, like kind of the possession of a man, especially if they're married. Huh? But to what extent do we know about the position of females? And also, are these Valkyria images authentic?
Yeah. So that's all. That's a big subject, and I made a video about it quite a while back. There is some new archaeological finds coming out, so I'm waiting until those come out before I make up my mind. But what we can say is women in Scandinavia in the Viking Age were treated better than women anywhere else in the world. That is for sure. They were very protected, and I don't believe that in the Viking Age that they were bringing their most beloved women and wives and sisters and things to battle with them. All of the sagas basically show more instances of protecting women and keeping them out of danger and things like that. Before the Viking Age, I actually think that women maybe participated in battles, maybe not fighting, but spirituality wise. And that is where these Valkyries come from. The women, we know that women in Roman times, Germanic tribes were accompanied by their women, and the women would stand on the sideline shouting at them encouragement and showing their breasts and things like that. We have Roman records of that. So in my opinion, I think that's kind of battle magic and
moral support.
Yeah, moral support, but also spiritual support, and in my opinion, and I think this is what the Valkyries originally were. That's a brand new theory for me. I need to do some more digging into it. I only thought about that in the past month, but I think that's what I believe now. But again, I'm going to look a lot more at these things and see what happens with these new archaeological finds and think about it later on in the year.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I like about you. You're not a dogmatic guy here. You're trying to you're evolving as you're learning. That's super important. That because too many people have an agenda and are married to certain notions, and that emotional bias is driving them rather than truth seeking. And you'll get nothing in spirituality if you're not a truth seeker.
Yeah.
You have to be a merciless truth seeker, even when it goes against your own holy cows.
yeah, exactly. Difficult sometimes, of course. I'm not perfect. Even me, I have some beliefs that I want to believe, but you just have to try and keep an open mind and not let your own beliefs or what you want to believe come out. Just look at what makes the most sense.
Yeah. And as for women, we know that, like you said, they could have possessions, for example. They could have slaves. So it would probably be better to be a woman here at that point than in one of the Catholic countries, for example. So yeah, I agree. Now, I think we'll call it a day. Let's just give a shout out again to your channel. What was the name again?
Yeah, Norse Magic and Beliefs is the channel. And it's pretty new. It's grown very much in the past month. It was just a small channel. I made it a year ago, but in the past month it's grown like crazy. So let's see what happens. And and anyone wants to check it out, they are welcome to.
Because I don't think your subject matter is not branded by YouTube. YouTube has different algorithms. Obviously, you're not on the corporate algorithm. If this was like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you will naturally grow it very fast. But now you're on the naughty list algorithm, but they have different levels too. And unless they suspect, I mean, YouTube may think this is some kind of Nazi thing, then you're going to go on the worst algorithm, which I am at. Yeah. But I think you have avoided that, and that means actually hope to grow your channel to a certain extent. You can. So, I really wish you luck with the channel. I really hope it will take off.
Thank you.
And I think it will. But for people who hasn't been there, I have to say you got a lot of practical stuff, which is very useful stuff. For example, beginner's tips for Norse paganism, stone and crystal magic use, other titles I can read here. How did they celebrate this festival? So it's like you're trying to educate them on a multi-approach level here, I would say.
Yeah, and always trying to use the sources. This is the main problem on YouTube and the internet. People are making these videos, but they're just talking. With me, every single one of my videos, I tell where the source is from and what it says, and that's at least. It doesn't tell us much sometimes, but it can at least it can point us in the right direction.
So that's a very scholarly approach. You distinguish between when it's your own speculation or theory and when it's actually a source.
Yeah, exactly.
Very important to do. So I saw somewhere that you were into wrestling or something.
Yeah. MMA. That's what I do. That's
like Joe Rogan, right?
Yeah. That's my real dream. So we'll see. I haven't been able to get a fight now since COVID came in, but that's what I'm really here in the world to do, is fighting. So the YouTube is great, but fighting is what I really am giving 100% focus on right now. So look out in the next few years, I guess.
Have you heard about? I have a friend. He's from Haugesund, southwest.
Yep.
He showed me. I think it was a martial arts magazine where a guy. I think he was Norwegian. Could have been a Swede. No, I think he was Norwegian. He talked about a tradition in his family that he said went back to the Viking times, and that was like a kind of a fighting technique, kind of similar to Eastern.
Yeah, glima. Probably glima. Yeah.
Okay, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that again is wrestling has been a part. Wrestling is the oldest sport of all humans. We all did this, and it was a very important sport going back many thousands of years.
Greeks, Roman, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it was called glima in the Old Norse. We have many Old Norse tales of wrestling, and of course, this tradition has kind of been continued, and it's called glima. It's small, but there's definitely still some practitioners today in Norway, especially in Iceland, is where it's popular. There's a very specific type of wrestling with specific rules.
Interesting. So this guy who was in a magazine, he claimed he had it in his family, So I suppose they could let that survive because it's not necessarily a threat to Christianity.
Yeah.
Christians were not above murdering and fighting and everything. Oh, have you looked into this since you are into wrestling?
Yeah, it's wrestling. Of course, we know it was done. It's just the rule set, right? That comes with modern Glima. Like how many of those rules and how much of that style can be traced back to Viking times. We don't know. Of course, they wrestled. Of course, we probably wrestled for hundreds of thousands of years. But exactly what the rule set is and what the style is and the techniques, that we don't know. But yeah, that's I would say. Definitely most of the modern practitioners of Glima, probably most of it was similar to the style that might have been practiced long ago.
Yeah, this guy also, I think that he was using what we Norwegian call stock. What's that in English? Wand?
Yeah, I think so. Or staff.
Staff.
Maybe.
Okay, could be. Okay. And you're a musician too, right?
Yeah, that's just on the side. I'm like,
right.
I like techno music, so I make those songs. They're not good yet, but I hope in the future I'll get some more skills and be making some better music, and that would be something interesting too.
I'm surprised it's techno. I would imagine it was more like what's it called? The most popular now Viking music. They used it in Vikings too.
Oh, there's Vardruna.
Vardruna, yeah, something like that I would expect from you.
Oh, that's my favorite. I love all the folk music and I love metal too, but I'm not good at playing instruments. So.
I think those guys came out of a black metal band, actually.
Yeah, they did black metal, and yeah,
because I knew the guys in Gorgoroth, friends of mine.
Yeah, I think Einar, he was the drummer in Gorgoroth.
Yeah, he is the skinhead, right?
Yeah, with the long braided beard. In Vardruna, yeah.
Right, so he's the one who took Vardruna further. That's wow. I shouldn't say anything on air about them. It's not polite. But I observed they were interested in spirituality back in the day. So that's great because it's pretty good music. I'm into Norse music, and I can't stand many of these new. Traditional Norse music like Kalenda Maya, for example, but many of these new that comes out of the rock genre, it's not. But I would say that Vardruna has really hit a nerve. I think their music is a very good. There are others too like that. Isn't one of them named Gåte? I think there's
Gåte.
And then there's Ymstammen. Have you heard them?
Yeah, I've heard that. And Heilung is also a very, very popular one now.
Right, never heard of them.
Yeah. All these kinds.
Right, okay. I think I'm going to end this show today with a song from Ymstammen. Have you heard the one where they sing about how we were christianed?
No, I don't think so.
Se nord og se ned, for det ingen som våger dem å hevne. You never heard that one? Oh, it's wonderful.
No, I don't think so.
Well, you're going to enjoy it now then. Because I'm gonna play it now. But I guess, is there anything you want to add before we part?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for having me. That was a really, really good conversation. And I will.
Hang on, you don't have a website?
No website.
Okay.
I have an Instagram, and I have kind of an online business. But that's something else. I sell different training gear and apparel, things like that. But that's
you can give a shout out for that. Sure. What's the website?
Yeah, it's Norse Combat Sportswear on Shopify. And that's just barely set up now, and things will be for sale soon. But that's something different. That's all having to do with training gear and things like that.
Sure, but no, go and check out his YouTube channel, Norse Magic and Beliefs. You love the videos if you're just remotely interested in history or spirituality or Norse. You love it. So that's it. Thanks a lot for coming on today, Thor, and educating us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Ok, takk for praten og alt, så snakkes vi. Hold kontakten.
Ja, veldig hyggelig å prate med deg.
Og lykke til videre med kanalen.
Ja, takk. En fin kveld.
Ja. Hei. Det ingen som våger
Mange har reist bortere til en rikere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg, det ingen som våger dem å nevne. For til nå i saken har følgende hendt. Se nord og se ned, at spyd og kniver i slid har rent. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å hevne. Mange har reist bortere til en rikere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg, det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Og jeg får et syn i den forrige natt. Se nord og se ned, der stedet for vårt møte blir satt. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å hevne. Mange har reist bortere til en rikere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg, det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Men tiden lang før jeg reiser av sted. Se nord og se ned, bør jeg ta med meg en gåteniste. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å hevne. Mange har reist bortere til en rikere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg, det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Vel endelig utløper min ventetid. Se nord og se ned, nisten lett, men ikke det som i. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å hevne. Mange har reist bortere til en rikere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg, det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Jeg reiser i dager, jeg reiser i tre. Se nord og se ned, jeg ser motspilleren og legger skytset til kne. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å hevne. Mange har reist bortere til en rikere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg, det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Framreiser seg digre brander med ett. Se nord og se ned, og vil hogge for fote og hevne sin ett. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å hevne. Mange har reist bortere til en rikere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg, det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Nei, kampen skal føres med munnlære kun. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort komme opp. Så stopper vi kjeften hans for en stund. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å hevne. Ingen har reist fortere til en ringere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg. Det ingen som våger dem å nevne. For i ditt navn har dine menn halset fram. Se nord og se ned, og aldri tilført oss annet enn skam. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å hevne. Ingen har reist fortere til en ringere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg. Det ingen som våger dem å nevne. For mitt folk har glemt sine skikker og hevd. Se nord og se ned. Frykt og skyld har dine prester avkrevd. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å hevne. Ingen har reist fortere til en ringere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg. Det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Hvordan kan dine menn herske over alt liv? Se nord og se ned. De som ikke engang tør se et lem som stivt. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned, og det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Ingen har reist fortere til en ringere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg. Det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Og med den kvites stemme ble lav. Se nord og se ned. Var hans tunge virkelig skåret av. Se mot nord, se ned, se ditt kort som kommer opp. Se nord og se ned. Og det ingen som våger dem å nevne. Ingen har reist fortere til en ringere hede. Ære vil flere betinge seg. Det ingen som våger dem å nevne.
Now, this song you just heard is called The Quad of Vengeance by the aforementioned group Ymstammen, which means the tribe of Ymir. When this show comes out on YouTube, I'm gonna give an English translation of the lyrics on the video, because it's so text-based, this song. It's an old band. They were active more than 20 years ago and don't have a YouTube or Spotify channel, but some of their old material will be available soon, as a record company in my hometown, Bergen, has picked them up for a re-release this coming winter. Incidentally, I'm currently discussing with the guy behind the band to have him on for a conversation about runes, seeing as he is formally educated in Iron Age history and runology. So like I said in the show, pay attention for much more in this Norse series. And remember to subscribe to us at ODC, whatever podcast platform you usually use. And of course, screw YouTube, where you have to double check that you're still subbed to our channel, seeing as the algo unsubs people on our behalf. And also make sure the bell is hit with notifications for all updates. Come on, We only release 2 shows a month, so it's not as if you'll be spammed. Finally, let me end this episode with some quotes from Håvamål, meaning sayings of the High One, referring to Odin, which is a scripture going back to at least the 1200s, and regarded as one of the most important sources of Old Norse philosophy. If aware that another is wicked, say so. Make no treaty with foes. Where you recognize evil, speak out against it, and give no truces to your enemies. Wherever you know of harm, regard that harm as your own, and give your foes no peace. Wealth dies, friends die, one day you too will die. But the thing that never dies is the judgment on how you have spent your life. A farm of your own is better, even if small. Everyone's someone at home. A clear head is good company. Drink is a dangerous friend. Drink your mead, but in moderation. Best is the banquet one looks back on after and remembers all that happened. Advice given by others is often ill counsel. Affection is mutual when men can open all their heart to each other. He whose words are always fair is untrue and not to be trusted. A man should be loyal through life to friends and return gift for gift. Strong desire may stupefy heroes and dull the wits of the wise. To love a woman whose ways are false is like sledding over slippery ice with unshod horses out of control. Fairest we speak when falsest we think, many a maid is deceived. It happens often enough that beauty ensnares the wise with desire, while the foolish remain unmoved. The cautious guest who comes to the table speaks sparingly, listens with ears, learns with eyes. Such is the seeker of knowledge. All guests should speak good of their host, or not speak at all. Go you must. No guest shall stay in one place forever. Love will be lost if you sit too long at a friend's fire. He is truly wise who's travelled far and knows the way of the world. Better gear than good sense a traveller cannot carry. Better than riches for a wretched man far from his own home. The traveller must train his wits. All is easy at home. He who knows little is a laughingstock amongst the men of the world. About his intelligence no man should be boastful, rather cautious of mind. Speak useful words, or be silent. An ill-tempered, unhappy man ridicules all he hears, makes fun of others, refusing always to see the faults in himself. To ask well, to answer rightly, are the marks of a wise man. A glib tongue that goes on chattering sings to its own harm. These things are thought the best: fire, the sight of the sun, good health, with a gift to keep it, and a life that avoids vice. Wealth may vanish in the wink of an eye. Gold is the falsest of friends. The worst sickness for a wise man is to crave what he cannot enjoy. It befits a man to be merry and glad until the day of his death. Enjoy the good you are given. And that's what you're given today. Thanks for dropping by. I've been your host Al, thanks to my team and your support. Be seeing you.
Who is number one?